Mary Catherine Ham, Brian Wilson, Brian Neiman, today's newsmakers, and you. The Morning Majority, 630.
WMAL. 7:07 on the Morning Majority, and I checked, and we do still have a debt problem. So
last time we looked,
we have Representative Ron Paul of Texas on the phone. How you doing? Excuse me, Congressman.
I'm here. Thank you. Good to be with you.
So yesterday the House voted on this cut, cap, and balance bill. You voted against it. Tell me why.
Because it raised the national debt. And I have promised not to raise the debt. The debt is the problem, and most people are recognizing it. A lot of people are trying to work a way to get out of it, and the people who were doing that yesterday, I think they would like to. But it doesn't make any sense to me to have a debt problem and then raise the debt and go further into debt. So I think it was a completely wrong direction to go.
What's your preferred solution, that you would go past the August 2nd deadline and then be forced to balance?
Yeah, in a way, but I think the August 2nd deadline is so artificial. You know, we met the deadline a month or so ago. We're about $75 billion over that, so that tends to be very artificial. I think August 2nd is there because even though there's a lot of argument going on, I think everybody wants off for August, you know, and go on their trips.
Priorities.
So that's why August 2nd is it, because we were supposed to be off this week, theoretically, but they wanted to make sure, you know, that those August trips will still go, so they moved the votes up to do this.
Right, but there was the Public Policy Institute, the old CBO director of the Bush administration said, hey, this is the August deadline is real. I mean, Paul Ryan had said that he's looked at these numbers and he's seen the cash flow coming in, and that there will be problems in August if we don't raise the debt ceiling.
Yeah, but how big a problem? They can pay the interest, they can pay the military, they can pay Social Security. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they might slow up on paying some bureaucrats at the Department of Education or Department of Energy, but the world doesn't come to an end. We don't have to send the interest to the Federal Reserve. Mm-hmm. I mean, if they need money, they just print it.
Well, what about...
There's a lot of things you don't have to pay, just like an individual doesn't have to pay some of the bills, and then we just have to work our way out of it. But to raise the debt limit when that's the problem, you know, just compounds our problem, because all this debt will be liquidated. We do default on it, and I see this as an argument on whether you don't send out the checks or whether you liquidate the debt by just printing money and giving people money that has less value. Right. And governments of our size always opt for the second. They never quit sending the checks. So I don't worry about that for a minute. They will always go out. They'll work out something. I mean, the Federal Reserve spent $3 trillion bailing out banks and corporations and states and foreign governments and foreign banks. They're not going to allow our own Treasury to not send out payments because they have unlimited sums of money.
But what about the argument that if you don't raise the debt ceiling, you're actually making the debt worse because you run the risk of interest rates going up, you devalue the dollar even more? I know you're big on that. Could it actually make our debt problem worse by not raising the debt ceiling?
No, I can't see that, but interest rates are going to go up anyway. That's the big problem because the inflation has already come back. If you look at the private sources, and the American people agree with this, that prices for the consumers going up about 9% a year. So that is a tax, and interest rates are just artificially low because the Fed keeps buying Treasury bills and keeping the interest low. But no, I think that if you allow the market to work, yes, interest rates will go up, but that would be good because people who want to save and take care of themselves, you know, could have a CD that makes market rates of interest, and that's where capital would come from. You want to turn off the printing press, but you want people to save, so people who save and take care of themselves would make 5 or 6 or 7%. Mm-hmm. But when they make 1%, they're being cheated, and this is a deliberate policy. We cheat the people who act responsibly, and we reward the people who are supposed to spend, and we give banks money for free. So it's all out of kilter,
right?
And it comes from the whole fact that government is too big, we spend too much, and we can't afford it.
Congressman Paul, let's get down to brass tacks. There is a train that now appears to be leaving the station, and it is a proposal that is put together by the so-called Gang of Six over in the Senate. The president has said he's encouraged by this. Tom Coburn, a man who has been called Dr. No, has gone back into those negotiations, obviously pleased with something he got. We just had Grover Norquist on our air who said he needs more information, but initially he doesn't hate the ideas that he's hearing, if I could sort of paraphrase what he had to say. At some point a deal has to be made. Is this a train that you could get on?
No, I think they say they would raise taxes by about $1 trillion, and I don't see that as a solution.
But they're offering maybe as much as $500 billion off the top in cuts, and a total of about it depends what you hear, $3.7 to $4 trillion in cuts over a period of time.
This year we've accumulated $5 trillion of new obligations. The deficit's 1.6. What we borrow from the Social Security is 0.4. We have increased our entitlements by $3 trillion.
Yes, sir.
So none of that can't.
So not enough for you, then.
Well, no, and it isn't an arithmetic problem. It is an accounting problem for me. As I said on my floor statement yesterday, the American people and the Congress has to think seriously about what the role of government ought to be. And if you don't address that, this is all just tinkering around and saying, well, this is the deficit's going to be $3 trillion or $2 trillion or whatever, is missing the point.
Fair enough, but at some point, don't you have to be pragmatic about it and say that, okay, we fought hard, we stood our ground, we tried to pass a balanced budget amendment, but it's not going to go anywhere, so this is the best deal we can get.
Well, that's why I think what I'm saying is the only pragmatic thing to do, and that is admit that we can't afford, say, policing the world. How long can we stay in 140 countries and 900 bases and continue to add war on war? This is what usually brings great nations down, and nobody even talks about it. Yesterday we had $100 billion of cuts, so-called, and it actually increased the funding for the wars. So I think that is foolhardy, and we have to decide whether we can afford that. But we have to really challenge the whole concept of entitlements from cradle to grave. And nobody can, one half of the Congress said never cut a penny out of entitlements. The other says don't cut a penny out of this militarism. And then they say, well, this is a budgetary problem. How are we going to raise the national debt to keep this going? And so it is a huge problem. The default is coming. It's not going to come by not sending checks. The default is coming through the traditional way that's been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, and that is governments debase their currency. And if you measure debasement of the currency traditionally, which has been known for thousands of years, it's against gold. And the dollar's been devalued by 50% in the last 3 years in the midst of this crisis, telling us that we're on the verge of an explosion of inflation in prices.
Let me ask you, there was a report yesterday that Michelle Bachmann suffers from migraines and at times can be debilitating. Now, she says it wouldn't affect her ability to be the president of the United States. I'm wondering if you thought that was a fair report and if it's important that we know her medical history when it comes to migraines.
Well, sometimes I think people think they have to know more than they need to know, but you should need to know what a president, is capable of doing. I have taken care of a lot of patients with migraine, and it is pretty rough. I mean, it is a tough problem to take. So I have great empathy and sympathy for her if she is suffering from that. But I think it's probably legitimate to know. And I don't think that disqualifies somebody from running for office. I don't think that should be the deciding factor on how well she does. But I would say information is reasonable to know about.
Congressman Paul, great to have you on the show. We always appreciate your time. Thanks very much.